Hello and welcome from the First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, and to the year 2025. It's a few days after New Year's, but at the same time, there is still a sense of the new year beginning. And I want to share, as we begin, a poem that was written quite a while ago in 1908, even though it wasn't published until a few years later, by a woman named Minnie Lou Haskins, who was an economist. The poem was popularized, maybe that's the wrong word, let's just say um, made known or made better known by King George VI in 1939 at the very beginning of World War II in his Christmas address. And it's called God Knows, but sometimes it goes by the title The Gate of the Year. And it goes like this. And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown. And he replied, go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way. So I went forth and finding the hand of God, trod gladly into the night. And he led me toward the hills and the breaking of day in the lone east. So heart, be still. What need our little life, our human life to know, if God hath comprehension? In all the dizzy strife of things both high and low, God hideth his intention. God knows. His will is best. The stretch of years which wind ahead, so dim to our imperfect vision, are clear to God. Our fears are premature. In him all time hath full provision. Then rest, until God moves to lift the veil from our impatient eyes, when, as the sweeter features of life's stern face we hail, far beyond all surmise, God's thought around his creatures, our mind shall fill. Join me, if you will, in worship. Today we hear a very familiar passage from the second chapter of Matthew. In the time of King Herod, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem saying, where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage. When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem in the land of Judah are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who shall shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, come and bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out. And there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and they paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they returned to their own country by another road. The Bible never tells us that there were 3 wise men. There might have been 2, there might have been 7, there might have been 11, 15, who knows how many. We don't get an exact number. Chances are that the reason we think of them as 3 wise men are because Matthew does tell us that there were 3 gifts that they gave Jesus out of their treasure chests: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so it's easy to picture one gift coming from each of the wise men. It doesn't refer to them at any point as 3 kings. That probably comes from a reading of Isaiah chapter 60, verse 3, where Isaiah describes the realities and the glories of a restored Israel that has been brought back by God from exile and reestablished in the land. And Isaiah says, "Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn." And the same passage later in Isaiah chapter 60 says, "They shall bring gold and frankincense and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord." So you take those gifts that sort of stand out and may have been in the back of Matthew's mind when he talks about the gifts that they're giving the baby. And you add to that myrrh, which was an ointment that was used for, among other things, embalming. And you get these 3 gifts. And again, traditionally, they're identified as gold for Jesus being a king, frankincense for the incense that was used to honor a god. And so you have him as a king and a god, and myrrh, which was one of the items that was taken to anoint his body when it had been taken from the cross and laid in the tomb. And so it's a reminder of his sacrifice for us, his death for us. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, summing up what lay ahead for the baby. And what lay ahead would be that this child would be the ruler over a restoration of God's people, a restored kingdom, a gathering of God's people drawn back from exile, this time not from the physical exile of the people in Babylon and as far east as Persia. We'll get back to that later. But people from farther away than that, people driven away from God into the places where our sin exiles us, places that are far from God. And now that this child is come, now that God has entered into our world, now that God is beginning to pull together again people from far and near and give them a place in the kingdom of God, this is what this child will do. And it's recognized, where is it? By these strangers who come from far away. These, not three necessarily, not kings, but magi. Magi is a loaded term. In his book, The Birth of the Messiah, Raymond Brown says the term magi refers to those engaged in occult arts and covers a wide range of astronomers, fortune tellers, priestly augurers, and magicians of varying plausibility. In fact, our word magician comes from magi, magician, magic, magi. Now, as Brown points out, these were people of varying plausibility. And while there were certainly charlatans who were referred to as magi or wise men, there were among them sincere students of what we would now call astronomy, and who largely lived in the Persian Empire. These were people whose work, yes, it did blur over into astrology, but their basic job wasn't to forecast what tomorrow's weather would be or how you were going to do in your job interview next week. Their job was simply to watch the stars and to look for signs and to figure out the seasons and keep track of time, to do some of the many things that were associated, especially with the religion of the Persians, Zoroastrianism. And those sorts of magi, that sort of magi, seem to have been the kind who came from the East to see Jesus. Magi who had spotted a star or a comet or a conjunction of planets. Our modern astronomers discuss all the many things that could have appeared to them suddenly around that time, but whatever it was, there was something that was going on up there, and they had seen it, and they had taken it for a sign. Why did they associate it with Judea? Again, who knows? There are some who suggest that something happened in the constellation of Leo. And of course, Leo is a lion, and the lion is the signature mascot animal, the Lion of Judah. One question I would ask is, did the Persians identify constellations of stars the same way that the Greeks and Romans did? I don't know. That's not my, it's not my wheelhouse. It's not my specialty. But what is clear is that it's not important to get bogged down in that so much as the fact that they saw something and they acted on it. In some ways, they were no different from the shepherds that Luke describes out in the fields outside Bethlehem on the very evening that Jesus was born, in that they were just doing their job when they got a message from God that something big was going on. Their message didn't come from a star, their message came from angels. And still, it came to them. out of the blue, out of the night, and told them that they should pay attention to what was going on there. As for the Magi, when they got the message in their own way, it definitely got their attention, and it eventually led them to Jesus long after the shepherds were gone. Now, those Magi, again, unlike the shepherds, those Magi were not looking for a Messiah. They were probably, as I say, Persian, or from within the Persian Empire to the east. And they were not probably Jewish. They were Zoroastrian Magi. There were Jews living in the Persian Empire. The Book of Esther makes that clear. So maybe they had some idea, but probably not. There are a lot of questions about all of this. These are strange figures and strange goings on. They knew nothing, I would feel confident saying, of the scriptures. And as you read the story in Matthew, it becomes clear that not only didn't they know about the scriptures, they seem a little bit naive about the tensions that existed between the people of Judea and the Roman occupiers. And these wise men, when they arrived in Judea, they didn't know enough about what was going on in the next empire over to avoid stirring up trouble, and not just a little bit of trouble, but the kind of trouble that would lead Herod to call for a massacre, to order a massacre of children, innocent children. But what these Magi knew, they knew. They knew the stars, they knew the sky, they knew the natural world around them and above them. And they knew enough that it would set them off on a journey into the unknown. A journey that would really be a matter of faith, that would take them where they didn't know where they were going, but where they knew they needed to be. Richard Foster, a Quaker, wrote a book where he talks about prayer as a way of going on a journey like that, a journey of seeking God's love, or rather, of seeking to know God's love, since you don't have to find the love that's all around you. You just have to go through enough to realize that it's there, and that it's faith that shows that love to us. And it's faith that reveals that that is the true nature of God. In the introduction to Foster's book, he advises this. He says, one small word of counsel before we strike out onto this disciplined journey into the holy place. Healthy prayer necessitates frequent experiences of the common, earthy, run-of-the-mill variety, like walks and talks, and good, wholesome laughter, like work in the yard and chit-chat with the neighbors and washing windows, like loving our spouses and playing with our children, and working with our colleagues. To be spiritually fit to scale the Himalayas of the Spirit, we need regular exercise in the hills and valleys of ordinary life. And there's a certain sense in which the path taken by the Magi, that led them to the Christ child affirms that. They started out on their trip because of something that they saw in their professional life. Now, again, it's not the kind of professional life we might easily recognize or consider usual, but it was far more usual at the time, and it was certainly, in essence, just normal for them. But the first part of their journey, after they had seen the sign and after they had decided to follow the star, the first part of their journey was a false start because they, in their ignorance of the politics of the day, went straight to Jerusalem, where it made sense for a king to be found. But they had to be redirected once they got there by the word of the scriptures to another place, one that they weren't quite as prepared for, one that they hadn't expected, one that they probably had never heard of, a humbler, a more ordinary place. And that was where they found the child. This pattern repeats itself over and over and over, not only there, but in all sorts of people's lives. If you are seeking God or seeking to know God better, you don't need to go far at all geographically. And you can start right where you are and right now, and God's love is available. But if you're at a point in your life where your heart and soul are searching, and you're not seeing it right in front of you, and you're not seeing it all around you, and you feel you need to look further, then look where God directs. Start where you are and with what you know. With all those things that Foster mentioned, with your family life, with your professional life, with your relationships with people of all sorts around you, with the sky above you and the earth under your feet. Go and look around. Follow the sign that God gives you. And if you want to find not simply a king, but the King of Kings, do not go where kings are. Go to the places that kings avoid, those places of ordinary life that are unglamorous, those places of ordinary life that are familiar or less familiar because you avoid them. Go to the places you know, and go to the places that you may know too well, where life is most difficult. Maybe to a place where you know what is going on, but you don't want to go there. And that is highly likely where you will find what you're looking for. I sought him dressed in finest clothes, wrote John Bell. I sought him dressed in finest clothes where money talks and status grows, but power and wealth he never chose. It seemed he lived in poverty. I sought him in the safest place, remote from crime or cheap disgrace, but safety never knew his face. It seemed he lived in jeopardy. I sought him where the spotlights glare, where crowds collect and critics stare, but no one knew his presence there. It seemed he lived in obscurity. Then, in the streets, we heard the word that seemed for all the world absurd, that those who could no gift afford were entertaining Christ, the Lord. And so, distinct from all we'd planned, among the poorest of the land, we did what few might understand. We touched God in a baby's hand. Look around you. Look above you. What do you see? Look within you. Look to others. Look out for others. What will you find? For if you're seeking God, He's already come to all people, far and near, to all who call upon His name. Amen.